Hello, I'm Zach Kotz.
And I'm Candace Carlisle, and welcome to The Global Current.
This morning, we open with breaking news. The World Health Organization has issued new guidelines following the identification of a SARS-like illness coming from either Qatar or Saudi Arabia. For more on this developing story, technical producer Paul Murphy files this report.
At the moment, we still don't know very much about this virus. We do know that it is in the corona family of viruses. Coronaviruses, there are at least 6 viruses in this class of family of viruses which cause disease ranging from the common cold to SARS.
On September 23rd, the United Nations World Health Organization issued a press release which confirmed that a new SARS-like virus has been discovered in a patient hospitalized in the United Kingdom. The release describes the individual as a, quote, previously healthy 49-year-old male Qatari national. The man had previously traveled to Saudi Arabia and was first admitted to the intensive care unit in Doha. Since then, he was transferred to a British hospital, which, with assistance from the Health Protection Agency of the United Kingdom, confirmed that the man was infected with a SARS-like virus. According to AFP, the man is listed in critical condition at Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital in London and is being kept alive by an artificial lung. In another press release on September 25th, the WHO identified the first fatality from the virus, a 60-year-old Saudi woman. Lung tissue from the Saudi woman and the sample from the Qatari man were genetically analyzed by the HPA and were found to have a 99.5% genetic match. The new virus was compared to a sample of SARS at Erasmus University Medical Center in the Netherlands and was determined to be, quote, genetically distinct. In a Twitter post from the WHO, the organization also confirmed that the symptoms of the new virus were not the same as the SARS virus.
It is unusual, or it is different from SARS, and I need to emphasize again and again that this is not SARS. It will not become SARS. It is not SARS-like. It is a new virus. It is novel, and it is distinct from SARS, at least in the fact that, as we've seen so far, it causes very rapid renal failure.
That was Gregory Hartle in a press conference. Because the new virus has just been discovered and the case is confirmed, officials are still unsure about many of the aspects of the virus, but do believe it is inherently connected with the Arabian Peninsula. The Australian Associated Press reports that 5 individuals in a Danish hospital were quarantined as a precaution while they were tested for the strain.
These are only 2 cases so far apart in time and space. There is no indication that this transmits from person to person. We just don't know yet, and there are extremely few cases.
That was again Gregory Hartle in a press conference for the WHO. Reuters reports that the organization on Wednesday urged all health professionals to report any acute respiratory infections with any individual who had recently traveled to Saudi Arabia. Countries with large Muslim populations are closely monitoring the situation as the Hajj pilgrimage begins in October within Saudi Arabia. The Jordan Times reports that the Jordanian Minister of Health, Abdul Latif Werkat, said that the ministry's Pandemic Monitoring Committee was closely monitoring the issue and that the Jordanian nationals traveling to Mecca will be vaccinated against the seasonal flu and meningitis. William Schaffner, doctor and chairman of the Department of Preventative Medicine at Vanderbilt University, told ABC News that the reaction to the outbreak has been significantly better than the original SARS outbreak in 2003. It took the outbreak in Hong Kong and subsequent spread to bring that to our attention, said Schaefer to ABC News. The surveillance for viruses that cause disease, particularly respiratory viruses, has improved enormously over the last 10 years worldwide. What happened here demonstrates that. According to the WHO, SARS first appeared in Foshan City in China's Guangdong province in November 2002 and spread to over 28 countries, killing 623 people. Paul Murphy, The Global Current.
Well over 2,000 workers in a Shanxi province Foxconn plant were involved in a riot last Sunday, according to Chinese state media outlet Xinhua. According to the news outlet, 40 individuals were injured by the riots, and the cars, gates, and windows on factory grounds were damaged. The riot, which began in the factory's dormitory zone around 11 p.m. on Sunday, reportedly required 5,000 police units to quell. Xinhua says normalcy was restored around 9 a.m. local time on Monday. NPR's Frank Langfitt quotes Foxconn, the major supplier of iPhone parts, calling the events as not a riot, rather an incident. Langford went on to report on NPR's Morning Edition that around 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. local time on Monday, police units were speaking with the rioting workers over a bullhorn, asking for the group to send them a representative to discuss the events. The Wall Street Journal reports that Foxconn say the factory, located in the city of Taiwan, has over 79,000 workers living on the grounds. Although workers are the only individuals allowed to enter the 7-story dormitory buildings, some are speaking to foreign media outlets directly outside the buildings about the living conditions. In a Reuters article, a worker who was identified as Wong said, "The management is awful," and that the dormitory's bathroom floors were often covered in excrement. The article goes on to describe the individual rooms, as many as 30 to a floor, and with 8 to 10 people sharing a single room, segregated by gender and closely guarded by security personnel. Theft remains a pervasive issue in the factory, and guards are known for their, quote, dehumanizing efforts to stop theft. The guards here use gangster style to manage, said 23-year-old factory worker Feng Zhongyang to Bloomberg. We are not against following rules, but you have to tell us why. They won't explain things, and we feel we cannot communicate with them. In 2010, Foxconn received international criticism for its working conditions after a series of suicides. The company has yet to release an official press release on the incident on its website.
The race between Enrique Capriles Radonsky, former governor of the Miranda State, and incumbent Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez continues to ramp up as elections near. For more on the story, executive producer Laura Toledo files this report.
With elections now less than 2 weeks away, the candidates continue to push onward towards the finish. The Associated Press reports that the latest poll by Venezuelan firm Data Analysis showed Chavez with a 10-point lead over his opponent. Capriles has slowly chipped away at the incumbent's lead. In June, Chavez was 15 points ahead. Nearly 11% of those polled are still undecided, leaving room for an upset. Since winning the opposition primary in February, Capriles has traveled throughout Venezuela, even going door-to-door in some areas. He has even garnered endorsements from leaders in the region, including the main opposition party in Argentina. Capriles also sat down with Colombia President Juan Manuel Santos on September 9th. Although the president did not endorse Capriles, he did urge Venezuelans to turn out, quote, massively and peacefully for the elections. Chavez, who has been battling cancer for over a year, has been widely absent from the campaign aside from television appearances. Since his diagnosis, he has traveled to Cuba multiple times to undergo chemotherapy. The precise type and other details of the cancer have yet to be released. Supporters of Chavez have somewhat doubled their activity in attempts to compensate for Chavez's absence on the campaign field. On September 12th, Chavez supporters blocked the main road to the airport in Puerto Cabello, where Capriles was en route. On Monday, in La Guaira outside of Caracas, Capriles was heckled at a campaign rally as some Chavez supporters threw plastic bottles and fomented unrest. Chavez has continued to refuse to debate Capriles in a public forum. In 2009, a constitutional referendum passed with a 54% majority to lift the presidential term limits, allowing Chavez to run in the upcoming presidential elections. Laura Toledo, The Global Current.
The Chinese Intermediate People's Court in Chengdu returned a guilty verdict in the trial of Wang Lijun, the ex-Chongqing police chief, earlier this week. Wang met with U.S. consulate officials earlier this year, which ultimately led to the downfall of his ex-boss, top politician Beaujolais. According to Chinese state news agency Xinhua, Wang was found guilty of, quote, bending the law for selfish ends, defection, abuse of power, and bribe-taking. He has been sentenced to 15 years in prison for his role in the cover-up of the murder of a British businessman, Neil Heywood. Last February, Wang met with U.S. diplomats after fleeing to the U.S. consulate in Chengdu. There, he informed officials that Gu Kailai, Beaujolais' wife, played a prominent role in the November 2011 murder of Heywood. Kailai was given a suspended death sentence last month after being tried and found guilty of murder. Though he was only sentenced to 15 years, the Wall Street Journal reports that Wang could have faced the death penalty. However, he was treated with leniency due to a number of mitigating factors, including his cooperation in the aforementioned trial of Gu. The aftermath of events saw the arrest of Beaujolais, the popular former Politburo member and Communist Party secretary in Chongqing, where Wang was police chief. Bo was subsequently ousted from all party positions shortly after the scandal broke. As a centerpiece of one of the biggest political scandals in Chinese Communist Party history, Bo, who is assumed to have been in custody since March, is currently the subject of an ongoing investigation by internal Communist Party services. The verdict in Wong's case now clears the way for a party decision on the potential action against Bo. Given Wong's testimony during the trial implicating Bo in the Haywood murder, the speculation as to whether or not Bo will face criminal charges remains as questionable now as ever. When we return, executive producer Kumars Ahmed continues our coverage of the opening of the UN General Assembly session. Stay tuned.
Just minutes from New York City and a few hours from Washington, D.C., the John C. Whitehead School of Diplomacy and International Relations is an ideal place to study international relations and practice diplomacy firsthand in a professional, dynamic, and culturally rich setting. For more information, visit diplomacy.shu.edu.
Welcome back. Up next, executive producer Kumars Ahmed files this report on the opening of the 67th session of the UN General Assembly on Tuesday.
As the first Monday in October marks the beginning of the Supreme Court session, the third Tuesday in September serves as the invocation for the United Nations. Although business will begin soon enough, the opening is an exercise in ostentatiousness and nothing more. Less pompous than the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, but more aggrandizing than the announcement of the starting lineup at a basketball game, the opening of the UN General Assembly has turned into something akin to the first day of class. You know the first day of class, aka Syllabus Day. The teacher comes in, hands out the syllabus, and goes over what the class will be like for the rest of the year. The third Tuesday of September was actually last week, but traditionally housekeeping items are taken care of in the first week. The agenda for the General Assembly is drafted 90 days before the opening, but it's finalized on the first day. In school, there was a Pledge of Allegiance. At the UN, there is the, quote, minute of silent prayer or meditation. Then, what began this past Tuesday for this session is the beginning of general debate. General debate is defined by the United Nations rules as a period in which heads of delegations may state the views of their governments on any item before the Assembly. The speeches have no time limit, although the United Nations indicates a voluntary guideline of up to 15 minutes. If getting politicians from around the world to voluntarily limit their speaking time isn't a testament to the power of the United Nations, I don't know what is. This rotating pulpit of heads of state from around the world is reminiscent of when the teacher asks everyone in class to introduce themselves. This year, there are some notable new people in the class.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of states. This is the first time that I'm speaking at this rostrum at the United Nations. It is a very moving moment for me because I understand what the United Nations is for our world and what it has been for our history.
President of France, François Hollande, made his first appearance, along with Myanmar's President Thein Sein, as the country is increasing diplomatic relations with the United States. The new president of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, made his debut address at the United Nations.
My presence here today and addressing the General Assembly has multiple significance. I am the first Egyptian civilian president elected democratically and freely, following a great peaceful revolution hailed by the entire world. This revolution established a genuine legitimacy.
A notable absence this year is Muammar Gaddafi, who was killed last October after being overthrown in a revolution. Not only does this signify a changing political dynamic in the Middle East, but also means the end of his eccentric speeches to the General Assembly, which in the past have included demands that the United Nations move to Tripoli, so it would be easier for Gaddafi to travel without crossing many time zones. Yes, Gaddafi was that kid in the class. In 2009, Gaddafi used his time at the General Assembly to pontificate for 90 minutes, remember, the voluntary limit was 15 minutes, about conspiracy theories such as the Kennedy assassination. I, for one, was not familiar with the Jack Ruby was an agent for the Israelis theory that Gaddafi mentioned. Of course, Gaddafi is not the only head of state in history to use his time at the opening of the UN to be a class clown. Last year, Prime Minister of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, inferred that 9/11 was an inside job, and who cannot forget this gem in 2006 from Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, referring to President Bush.
Yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, from this rostrum, the President of the United States, the gentleman to whom I refer as the devil, came here talking as if he owned the world. Truly, as the owner of the world. I think we could call a psychiatrist to analyze yesterday's statement made by the President of the United States. As the spokesman of imperialism, he came to share his nostrums to try to preserve the current pattern of domination, exploitation, and pillage of the peoples of the world. An Alfred Hitchcock movie could use it as a scenario. I would even propose a title: The Devil's Recipe.
You probably don't even need the interpreter's voiceover to recall that outlandish comment. Also missing from this year's class, once again, are the Palestinians. Last year, the president of the Palestinian Authority submitted an application for Palestine to join the United Nations.
Mr. President, I would like to inform you that before delivering this statement, I, in my capacity as President of the State of Palestine and Chairman of the Executive Committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization, submitted to His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations, an application for the admission of Palestine on the basis of the borders of June 4, 1967, with Al-Quds Al-Sharif as its capital, as a full member of the United Nations.
The motion was eventually defeated by the Security Council. This was a rare instance of something meaningful being done during opening week at the United Nations in recent years. If the trend continues, then this parade of heads of state might be better to watch on tape delay on NBC with Bob Costas and Matt Lauer narrating. But if you're looking for real work and progress, then, well, class begins next week. I'm Kumar Ahmed for the Global Current.
In our continuing coverage of the protests gripping the Muslim world over the Innocence of Muslims film, staffer Matt Giordano discusses his personal views on the preparedness of the consulate in Benghazi.
On September 9th, 2012, a video clip was broadcast on Egyptian television. 2 days later, the ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, was killed at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. The connection between the two events seems apparent. But as the dust has settled over the past 2 weeks, we are slowly discovering that the connection between the two events is anything but apparent. The Innocence of Muslims, a deceptive yet inflammatory movie, has managed to deter American efforts at defining a new relationship with the Arab world. Harkening back to the 2005 Gillen's Post and Muhammad cartoon controversy that resulted in the deaths of over 100 people. But to what extent did this movie actually play in the killing of Ambassador Stevens? Initial reports out of Benghazi say a large mob of protesters had surrounded the U.S. consulate in protest over the movie. At some point, the protesters gained access to the consulate and allegedly set it ablaze, killing the ambassador along with 3 other Americans in the process. The story seemed likely enough, but as the days passed, another version of the events took shape. Instead of a large mob of angry protesters marching upon the consulate, it was later reported by the Wall Street Journal that over 100 men, armed with automatic rifles and rocket-propelled grenades, descended upon the consulate from all sides. They allegedly lobbed grenades and quickly stormed the gates. The entire compound was reportedly sprayed with bullets in what was described as a 5-hour-long gun battle, marked with mortars and gun trucks. The compound was reportedly set ablaze by RPG fire, causing the death of Ambassador Stevens by smoke inhalation. If this scenario seems a bit too well planned for a spontaneous mob protesting over a video, then you've identified a very important issue. Was this attack actually motivated by an inflammatory video, or was the attack planned days before? According to new information provided to Libyan and U.S. officials, the answer is yes. The attack against the U.S. consulate in Benghazi was a pre-planned act of terrorism, according to Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, not an outgrowth of angry mob mentality. Investigations have uncovered the attackers descended upon the consulate, knowing the layout and the amount of personnel inside, despite that its location was supposedly a secret. In the weeks that followed, the U.S. stance that the attack was a result of mob action has been dispelled by President Obama. The president's comment begged the question, who exactly was behind the attack on the consulate? According to reports detailing the days leading up to Ambassador Stevens' death, he was warned of the deteriorating security conditions throughout Benghazi, and he feared that he may have been put on an al-Qaeda hit list. What can be certain is that the ambassador's fears were warranted, and had the United States taken a more serious approach to the deteriorating security conditions throughout Libya, his death could have been avoided. Recommendations to enhance the perimeter around the U.S. consulate, along with the task of finding a proper location to securely house the diplomatic corps, were left unaddressed. It would appear that only through the murder of one of the government's own will we see a more serious approach taken towards the security concerns that face us in the Middle East. Not since the assassination of UN Special Envoy Sergio de Mello in 2003 has the diplomatic community been so affected by an act of terrorism. With the Arab Spring months away from celebrating its 2-year anniversary, a resurgent al-Qaeda that is still capable of carrying out high-profile attacks, and the publication of ignorant, offensive, and inflammatory material continues. The future is far from certain, especially in regards to the relationships the United States will have throughout the Middle East. But one thing can be said for sure. 11 years after the attacks on 9/11, al-Qaeda has claimed the lives of 4 more Americans. This is Matt Giordano for The Global Current.
And finally, technical producer Paul Murphy sits down with Akira Tokuhiro from the University of Idaho about the changing face of nuclear energy in a post-Fukushima world.
India has nuclear capabilities, and they also have a straining power grid, as we saw about a month ago with the blackouts. And it's also working to gather the necessary resources for nuclear fission. And then there's the Indo-U.S. nuclear deal. Do you think that nuclear power is something that developing countries can use as a tool to not only develop their infrastructure but their economy? How is it something that they can be able to use? Do you think it's viable for that? If they put in the investment?
India has the educated workforce. They have, you have to have a pretty large and educated engineering workforce to have nuclear power in your country, and they certainly have the capability. The other thing is that energy is directly correlated. The amount of energy that's available and that you have access to is directly correlated to the standard of living. I think India, with the large population they have, they realize that for the political, economic stability and growth, they need to have access to power. So I think what's happening in India is that's really it's in front of their face. It's evident for them. So that's why they're going to invest in nuclear power and the infrastructure, especially the grid. You generate the power, but you have to get it out. You have to transport it outside, and you have to have the grid that corresponds to the power that's generated at the plant. Okay, so that's what they need. So ultimately, in order to have the economic and political stability, you got to give access to that power to the people in terms of washers and dryers and television. So in terms of consumer products, so you have to get that power that's produced at the plant through the grid that's modernized to the households and to the people. This is the same in all developing countries like Nigeria, Vietnam, United Arab Emirates. People that are all these new nuclear nations. As developing countries realize that this makes the most sense.
We touched on how nuclear power. It's probably one of the least environmentally invasive parts of it, or one of the least environmentally invasive fuel sources. So if there is kind of this rise in developing countries utilizing nuclear energy more, how do they combat the problem of waste disposal? What's some ways that you can limit the environmental impacts? Fuel reclamation is one, but you still are going to have this kind of nuclear waste left over. What's a way that developing countries can easily and cheaply combat the environmental hazards that come with used up nuclear fuel?
You have to realize the amount of waste that's produced is compared to, the amount of waste that you produce, that's taken out by your garbage truck by each week, or the amount of fly ash that's produced from, burning coal. Compared to that, the amount of waste that you produce from nuclear power is very small in terms of volume. The metric that I remember is that the amount of energy that you use in a lifetime, one person's lifetime from nuclear power, is the size of a Coke can. The waste, for example, France has about half as many nuclear power plants as the United States. They recycle to reduce the amount of waste, and the waste that they have left over after recycling is, and I've been to the facility, it's about the size of 50 nuclear power plants, generating power for about, 60 million people, a nation of 60 million people, is about the size of one football field. With nuclear power and with the large educated engineering workforce, the country also has to take responsibility for their waste, the nuclear waste. And we in the United States certainly have the capacity and the capability and the know-how and the knowledge base to do that. But once again, because of this legacy of fear and the unknown and the political process, it's not, remember, Yucca Mountain is not a technical issue, it's a political issue. Every country that has invested in nuclear power, Japan included, and France, and many countries like Finland are taking responsibility in constructing, or they already have, a waste depository as part of their nuclear program. So that can be done. That international standard has to be conveyed for new nuclear nations as well. Okay? And the developed nuclear nations can certainly help the emerging nuclear nations manage their waste.
Talking about that international standard, so a big problem is that, and Iran, it's cliche to say, but Iran is kind of the poster child for this. The IAEA, do you think that that the organization itself is fulfilling its purpose and fulfilling its mission, and adequately and peacefully how to develop nuclear energy? Do you think that that mission is being fulfilled? Do you think that IAEA is the person to kind of set that international standard for these developing countries, and to kind of, because right now it's more of ensuring that countries are not using nuclear energy for, or they're not weaponizing it. Do you think that the IAEA could kind of move into this regulatory role, not just of an international organization, but more of an international standard where they're not just going and making sure that people aren't weaponizing things, but they're adhering to standards? Do you think that the organization not only can help in that, but do you think that it's doing its job right now?
Well, the IAEA, like the United Nations, has a very difficult challenge. Only partially a regulatory authority like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. A regulatory authority has the mandate and has the authority to impose fines, to shut down a nuclear power plant, has authority, meaning has some means and tools to exercise the regulatory. I mean, there's a power that's attached to the regulatory mission that it has. The IAEA has, their function is partially a regulatory, really to promote the regulatory, but they don't have any authority, in my perspective. And then their largest function is diplomatic. When you have a diplomatic component or mission, that automatically means that you have to have before you can take action, you have to have consensus from all the parties concerned. When you have to reach consensus, then you cannot take decisive action like a full 100% regulatory authority can do. So in terms of Iran, it's walking a fine line between the authority that it doesn't have, there's not a full deck of authoritative options that they have. Most of it is, what they're exercising is diplomatic. So it's hard to blame them. They don't have any teeth in terms of what authority they have. Okay, so that's, there is that danger that there is with the material potential for diverting that nuclear material into a weapon objective. But and that that's a nuclear security, and non-proliferation is about maintaining that doesn't happen. And as far as the IAEA, where they come in, most of their function is diplomatic. Part of it is regulatory, but what's really lacking is that they don't have the authority. That authority and sanctions and so forth, for whatever effectiveness or ineffectiveness it has, usually comes through the United Nations, right? So, sure, it could be better, but we're dealing with the situation and the institutions that we have as they exist today.
As always, the entirety of this interview, along with our other interview with Paul Wilson from the University of Wisconsin, will be posted online on our blog, blogs.shu.edu/globalcurrent.
Once more, I'm Candace Carlisle.
And I'm Zach Kotz. Thank you for listening to this latest episode of The Global Current. See you next week.